Well, Mark, I think we've got most folks here. It's probably a good time to go ahead and jump in. And if you guys, everybody could just go ahead and mute themselves while Mark's speaking, that would be great. Take it away, Mark.
Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. This is my home church. I don't know if most of you are aware of that, but I moved from Austin to Baltimore in 2018. So haven't gotten back because of the pandemic, but I'll be back for sure soon. And obviously, I became a licensed Unity teacher in 2009. And I'm kind of a studious type person, so I spent a lot of time in the library and began digitizing audio tapes and began streaming them because at the time I was a software engineer and I knew how to stream it on the internet. And that led to Truth to Unity. And Truth to Unity is a website, and it's now 11 years old, but 5 years into Truth to Unity, I realized that African Americans were not represented. And the reason they weren't represented is because I was drawing resources out of the archives. And as is true in most historical archives, what you find there are what people put in, and what people put in are what people felt were important at the time. And marginalized people weren't included. And so what we have, because of historical reasons, is a somewhat diminished representation of African American contributions to Unity in the Unity archives, and that's true everywhere. Unity was not intentional, it's just the way it was. And I began a project called African Americans in Unity in order to basically collect stories. And what you see here is the homepage. And it's if you go to truthunity.net, and you'll see that there's a link there for African Americans in Unity. And I'm going to scroll up a little bit because I have a post here made in 2018 that explains why it is that I'm doing what I'm doing. But the short answer is I'm simply collecting stories. And my belief is that if there are enough stories about African American contributions to Unity, then someone will come along and write a book. And we will have a great understanding. And I'm not the person to write the book, but I am the person to collect the stories. And that's what this is all about. I'm going to share with you a bunch of stories and links and videos and so forth. And by the way, while I'm here, you'll notice on this page, there is a link, and it says Presentation to Unity Church of the Hills 2014. And if you go to that link, what I will do, I'm going to copy that link address. And could somebody put it in the chat box? I know somebody's going to get there. If they would just right click on it and put it in the chat box, everyone can then have a copy. It's a PDF, it has all the links that I will show you and an outline of the talk. So let me begin by just reiterating that the purpose of this is not to document a history of African American contribution to history. It's to collect stories. And I believe that when we collect stories, what we begin to do is to right the imbalance that was done over the years. And there was plenty of imbalance. And one of the ways that I want to collect these stories is what I've done is created a gallery of every African American who is at least ordained in the first 100 years of Unity. And that's what we see here. And I call it African American Leaders in Unity to 1989. It does include some people who were not ordained, but most of them were. And to the best of my knowledge, it is inclusive of everyone who was ordained. And I might have missed someone. I did not. I got a lot of help in picking names out of these, or getting this information. And it is unclear over, sometimes race is not definitive. There's no clear boundary between black and brown and yellow and white. And so who is an African American? I readily admit I don't know, and I might be wrong. And if I'm wrong, then I will fix it. But we do our best. Okay. The goal is to collect stories. And what I want to do is to highlight a couple African Americans who were early leaders. And I want to begin with Ruth Cox. And if you can you see my mouse right now? Okay, just something. Okay, Ruth Cox is one of the first people that I found, and Ruth Cox was in Louisville, Kentucky. And the reason I found her is in the archives there happened to be a field department survey, in which she was listed, and there's about 150 of these surveys, and 6 of them are apparently African American. Ruth Cox being one of them. And so all I knew about her was what was in her survey from 1948. And I often wondered, what her life was like. And like many of these people, they didn't have churches. What they had was house churches. They invited people into their living room. And Ruth Cox, here's some census information that I found. And it was only in the past year that I happened upon a Contact magazine article about her. And that's where I have this picture. And I found out that she was ordained in 1971. And it just brought great joy to me to know that this woman, who in 1948 was totally unknown, okay, she did become a licensed teacher, but she was not anyone who is notable in Unity. But in 1971, she was ordained. And standing right behind her is Donald Curtis, who was the minister of Dallas, Texas, a well-known movie star. And she was ordained with Donald Curtis. And it just brought a great amount of joy to me to know that this smiling woman was eventually ordained. Another person I want to highlight is James Elliott. And I hope my clicks, did James Elliott come up? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay. James Elliott was a dentist. And originally he was a bricklayer, but he worked hard. He went to dental school, and he served in Chicago and in Detroit. And he was one of the people who were not ordained. But he was, we probably would not have had the leader that I'm going to introduce to you about Chicago. And Chicago's been really for Black African American history in the early stages. Chicago was there. It moved to Detroit, but James Elliott moved to Detroit as well. But this gentleman was an early person. He also had a field department survey. This is where I got his picture, and I have information about him. You see, the only people that got shown were the people who had enough confidence in submitting their information, okay? Because the way it worked, if no one went out and asked, and are you doing anything? And unless you spoke up and made yourself known, you didn't get recognized. James Elliott was one of the great early people. Again, he served in house churches. He was very influential. The first well-known minister, she wasn't ordained at the time, but this woman, Henrietta Gordon, led the Chicago church. And what makes her notable is she would be the pastor for Johnny Coleman. And so many notable people came out of the Chicago church, but Henrietta Gordon built and ran that church in the real early stages. And so what we have is a large number of house churches. And I want to go to on this page, there's a link here that says African American in Unity History. It's right there. I'm going to go there. And this is a 1993 presentation that was made at Unity Village by 4 who are now well-known African Americans. At the time, they were students, and they began. They wanted to raise up African American history. They did this presentation in 1993. It was recorded, And so I was able to get the recording and to segment it. And what I'd like to do is to play the clip about colored study groups, because it kind of sets where things began in Unity in terms of African Americans' recognition. So can you hear? I'm going to make it as loud as I can.
News concerning truth centers in other cities. In 1919, it began listing the meeting places.
That's as loud as I can make it. Is it understandable?
The first listing that we found was in an issue dated December 13, 1919. And what that did, it listed colored Unity study groups. And in that issue, it listed that in the home of a Mrs. E. W. Fields, a Unity study class would to begin. And that was located right here in Kansas City, Missouri. In subsequent issues, colored study groups and colored Unity centers were listed on a regular basis. From the 1920s through the 1950s, groups were started in Florida, California, New York, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Washington, D.C., Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, basically all over the country.
Okay, that is the end of the clip. So I'm going to go on to the next topic. But what I wanted to bring out from this is Unity in its early stage were house groups. They were not ordained. They were run by licensed teachers. That was something that was attainable for African Americans within Unity at the time. There's plenty of discrimination, but my point is that there was this existence of a large number of house groups led by these early leaders who were, some of which later became ordained. But that gave rise to what I'll describe later as the pioneering mentality of African Americans. African Americans, because they were not easily accepted into white churches, had to form their own churches. And so they wound up pioneering a tremendous number of churches in the early years. Now, the first ordinations we know of came from the ordination photos. And I want to show the 1952 ordination photo. And the reason I want to show this is because it's the first, this has the first two ordained Unity ministers, one being Mabel Butts of Atlanta, Georgia, and the other being Helen Mouton of Los Angeles. I will go to Helen first, because the church that she founded, which is Christ Unity Church in Los Angeles, still exists. If you have a web browser and you put in KRST Unity, you're going to come up with the Christ KRST in African lingo, I'm going to say, for lack of a better word, of the church that she founded. And it's still there, and it's still run, and it's an unbelievably creative expression of unity. But Helen Mouton, the first of two people ordained in Unity, was African American, launched a church that is still there. We also have Mabel Butts. I'm going to go to Mabel. We don't know as much about her. There just simply is no information that I've been able to find except what was in the yearbook. But there's no, I have a little bit of census information. But she was the first of two. She was one of two people who began. So those were the early ordinations. 2 years later, in 1954, we have two others who were ordained. And you see Janet Holland here. And who am I missing? It might have just been Janet. No, I forget the name of this gal here, but well, here it is. Corinne Smith. What am I thinking? Janet Holland and Corinne Smith. So 2 years later, in 1954, there were two more African Americans who were ordained. Then in 1956, there was one more, John Johnson, right here. We don't know much about him, but he was ordained. And you have to remember, at the time, the only way to become a minister was to go through 2 years of training. And at that time, African Americans were not allowed to stay overnight at Unity Farm, which it was at the time. So they had to travel back and forth. And that changed with a woman named Johnny Coleman. And I want to show the rock star class of 1958. And we see this woman named Johnny Coleman here in the upper. She was a very tall woman. And also in this picture, the reason I call it the rock star class is we have a guy named Ed Rabel. And here we have a woman named Catherine Thrower, who would later be known as Catherine Ponder. And so I look at that picture and I say, man, what a year. I sure would have liked to have been a member of that class. Now, look, we really can't, I will get into Johnny Coleman in a minute, but I just want to say that with Johnny Coleman came a personality that was strong enough to assert fairness and justice, that things at least shifted. They didn't get all better, but they shifted, and they shifted in a very profound way. But we had these ministers come out, and I want to highlight that. Is the background noise, my daughter's talking to my wife on the phone? Okay, all right, I'll tell them to hush up if they. So I want to, before I get into Johnny Coleman, I want to talk about collegiality, because there is a woman named Catherine Brooks who was in St. Petersburg, Florida. And she started a church which is still there, okay? And they recognize Catherine Brooks as their founder. It's not, I wouldn't characterize it as any more African-American than any other church. It's a simple church, but she built it. But she received help from a woman named Louise Beatty. And Louise Beatty is the founder of the big St. Petersburg church that we know of today. Louise Beatty was handicapped, and her hip was deformed. And when she walked with just a tremendous limp. She looked like someone who was, really had a deformed hip. And she knew what it was like to be discriminated against, to be laughed at, to be marginalized. And somehow Louise Beatty, according to Catherine Brooks, Louise Beatty was determined that Catherine Brooks was going to be successful, and she helped her. And so when I talk about the discrimination, just know that there were some wonderful stories here, which were where people really helped each other. Not everybody was discriminatory, and Louise Beatty was one of them. And we've got a lot of testimony that was true. Let me go back to Johnny Coleman now. Johnny Coleman, and I don't have a profile for her. I just have a place marker for her. She was a ministerial student in the mid-50s. And like everyone else, she had to live, she was not allowed to live at the village. She came from Kansas City every day by cab or bus. And her story is phenomenal. For those of you who don't know, she wound up in 1969 by 1969, she had become Unity's most successful congregational minister of all time. The church that she founded in Chicago had 4,000 attendees in the 1960s. She was good friends with the mayor. She worked well with the establishment, but she knew how to build a congregational church. And she was very successful at it. In 1969, she became the president of the Association of Unity Churches. And she was not putting up with too much marginalization and discrimination. And what happened was Unity just could not accommodate fast enough. And eventually, Johnny Coleman decided that she needed to part ways with Unity, and she formed her own denomination called the Universal Foundation for Better Living. And they started out with 21 churches, and today they still have 21 churches. It has not been tremendously successful. But one of the 21 churches is here in Baltimore, and it is a very successful church, and it is also a breakaway from Unity Baltimore. But Johnny Coleman, at the last year of her training, had enough, and she announced to the faculty and the students that she was either going to stay at the village or she was going to leave the program. And that shifted things enough so that Unity gave way and provided her lodging on the campus in staff quarters, not with the other students. She was a big enough person to say, "I'll take it," because she wanted to become ordained. And today, that cottage where she was given residence is now being renovated by Unity World Headquarters, and will become a sort of memorial to Johnny Coleman and her legacy. And so
Mark, actually, the cottage has been condemned, and they're finding another one to use.
I didn't know that. Who's speaking?
That was Mary Grace.
Okay.
I found that on the UUMSAA call last week.
I did not know that. Okay. Well, just go back to Johnny Coleman. She changed things. And it was the 1960s. I think people were they were reckoning with our past. And they did not want to, Unity was big enough to at least reckon with that legacy and to change. But it was a very difficult time, and it's a very sad story. There's all sorts of offshoot stories about the swimming pool and other things, but it was Johnny Coleman who shifted the policy in Unity to have to not discriminate with African Americans on services. There were still problems though, but Johnny Coleman was a very successful person. And my point in bringing her up, and this is the real important, she was Unity's most successful congregational minister. No one has even come close to accomplishing what she accomplished, including Eric Butterworth. He had a big church in Manhattan, but he didn't have a church where there was this integrated community. What Eric Butterworth had were this large number of people who would show up on Sunday morning and listen to him talk at a great big rented hall, but there was no real community activity other than a summer workshop. There was no foreign missions program. There was no Sunday school. There were very few classes other than those that were given by Eric Butterworth himself. There was a few assistant ministers, one at a time with short tenures. Johnny Coleman, on the other hand, created this vibrant community, which still exists. And so she's a success story. And when you read in Unity about Blacks in Unity, you're always going to hear about Johnny Coleman and Ruth Mosley. And the problem with that is they're basically stories about how whites reacted to successful Blacks. They're not stories about successful Blacks and why they were successful. We have never gotten the story about why Johnny Coleman is successful. What we have gotten is the story of how Johnny Coleman was discriminated against. And the story that I want to see written, and I hope we find out, is why is it that African Americans thrived in the unity message, in the New Thought message. And that we're still looking for. And that is why I drove up from actually Austin to Memphis, and I interviewed Ruth Mosley. And Ruth Mosley, she passed on earlier this year, or in 2020. She's the other person besides Johnny Coleman that we often hear about in African-American history and unity. She came out of the Delta region of Mississippi, just south of Memphis. And she was uneducated and poorer than poor. You know, the Delta region is about as poor as you can get in the United States, including Appalachia. It doesn't get any more poor than the Delta region. She came out of there and she became, she moved to Memphis. She was a house cleaner and a cook. And her story is that she moved north, and that is the story of basically a lot of African Americans in American history, is to move out of the South to the urban north in order to find better working conditions. She did that. She wound up in Detroit, and wound up becoming a unity teacher. I don't think she was a licensed teacher. She just started teaching in churches, teaching metaphysics. And she never stopped learning. And at one point, she was able to get through Unity's training program. She became ordained. Went back to Chicago back to Detroit, and realized that in Detroit, there were a lot of people who would do what she called urban ministry if they could get the education, but they couldn't get the education. And so there's this long, well-documented story about Ruth wanting to start a ministerial school in Detroit that would be apart from the training school in Kansas City. And I would like to, and as I mentioned, I drove up to Memphis and I interviewed her in 2017, 2018. And I want to play the clip. It's clip 22 here. Give you a sense of who Ruth is and the pride that she had in the urban school.
I'm hoping that Catherine can get it worldwide and get as many people. One of the things that she has done that I'm not sure about, she have, see some of these, as I told you, some of the urban school students had 8th grade education. They didn't have.
Folks, I'm on the wrong clip. I'm sorry.
People didn't have a job. You ought to saw them. They were so proud. They were molded, and they were strong. Their faith. And if you hear some of them talk, you just wonder, what did they have in mind? But to see a mother cry with that much education, you don't know how far ahead that had put her. For the first time in her life, she was ahead. Now, when they went to Unity, there was people who was asking them where was they educated, blah blah blah. Then I started looking at the people that already were in Unity. They were not that educated either, and nobody said. I pointed out something to them. Oh, they don't ask me. I said, so what you know, use it. That's all.
Okay, what you know, use it. I wanted to get to that phrase because that defines what Ruth Mosley's philosophy was. Here's a woman had nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. And had nothing even when she got to Detroit. And even after she launched her church, which is still there, still had nothing and had no real standing within Unity. But her whole point was, what you got, use it. And she had moxie. Now, the story of the launching of the school is well documented. You can listen to the video here. You can read a lot of accounts of it. There's been a biography of Ruth called The Book of Ruth, which is mysteriously been lifted by her former publisher. I don't know the details of it, but the story is well known. The point is that before Ruth, it was almost impossible for an African American, a poor African American, to find their way to Kansas City, because first of all, there were education requirements, but then there were financial obligations. And what Ruth did is she set up a program in Detroit where she would take anyone and have them begin at whatever level they were at. She recruited teachers from the local community college to get to provide basics in English and the basic college level education requirements. She took anyone, and she instilled in them the pride, so that after 2 years in Detroit, they were ready to go and spend a final year in Kansas City. And by all accounts, they thrived. They were very well educated, very well done. And Ruth, as you can see, was not someone who had a whole lot of style and splash on her own, but she instilled a determination among her students, and they weren't all black. The second year, there were whites who came in, and what we're going to show is that there's this legacy that is still with us that is absolutely essential to Unity's future. And I will get to that in a minute. I encourage you to come out and listen to Ruth's video. I believe it's about 70 minutes long, and it will give an example of her experience. I want to raise up one more guy named Charles King. Does anyone know who Charles King is or heard of him? Barbara, are you by chance related to Tom? No? Okay. All right.
No, I'm not, but I know Charles King since I was 12 years old.
Well, why don't you take the mic then and just share with us a little bit about Charles King?
Well, Charles King led the youth programs that I went to that were Camp Farthest Out. And that was started by another New Thought person out of Minnesota. His name has left me, Clark. Glenn Clark, who was a wonderful man. And anyway, Charles inspired many youth, through his singing. He attended Unity, and but my experience with him was with youth, and at those programs we had many youth because they were attracted to this very dynamic man, and he would challenge us. You call yourself Christian, have you read the Bible? Have you read the New Testament? We all went home and read the whole New Testament so that the next year we could tell him that we had done this. And then he would teach us about what was the important part of the New Testament. Anyway, he was a dynamic speaker, and he became ordained later on.
I happened to, in the archives, I happened to find this tape. If you can see it, it's handwritten. It was not professionally recorded. No one knew it was there, but I have an evening with Charles King. Let me play 1 minute from his final
Now, as we heard all of the concerns that are on our hearts here, I suppose if any of us, if I had asked you to write 10 things down, that all of us...
I wanted you to hear the man's voice. Let me do a little bit of music.
How about I got the joy, 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 joy.
The reason I wanted to play that is the man was absolutely dynamic. And as it says here, in the 1973 and 1975 Unity Conventions, 1970 and 1973, and I guess 1976 convention, he held 7,000 people in Kansas City and led them. And he was just an exciting guy. Another person I know, Barbara, shares the exact same story with you as you have. Is just an absolutely dynamic guy, and to its credit, Unity ordained him. He was a world-class entertainer. He was not a nobody by any means. And by the way, I'm going to just make a little plug here since Barbara gave me such a great introduction. And how come it didn't come up? Metaphysical Christians, open link in new tab. Oh, it is there. I just didn't see it. If you want to read about Glenn Clark, his well-known autobiography is The Soul's Sincere Desire. He is the guy who started Camp's Furthest Out. His book went out of copyright in March of 2020. So I have The Soul's Sincere Desire here if anyone wanted to read it. It's a great story. If you're into...
Mark,
Yep.
This is Mary Grace. I have Charles King's album, and it is in great condition.
Well, digitize it and send it, or lend it to me and I'll digitize it.
Yeah, I may do that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So let me go back to, where was I? And thank you, Barbara. Okay, so let me move on to, so what we have here is we have people starting out as licensed teachers with home churches. We have the beginning of ordinations. We have a rock star celebrity in the form of Johnny Coleman, who built a church of 4,000 people. We have Ruth Mosley, who has created a urban ministerial school. Before I move on, I want to talk about how she has influenced a couple people, and how this is the ordination photo of the Unity Institute graduation class of 2015. Okay. Now what happened was the deal was struck with Ruth Mosley in 1984 that she would get the students prepared so that they could come up to Kansas City and do their final year, or go down to Kansas City from Detroit and do their final year. Okay. And that gave rise to, let's do a year like this. This is 1980. Well, let's do 1986. This is the ordination photo for 1986. And I see 1, 2, 3, 4 African Americans. There might be more. Let me go to 1987.
May I speak to that year?
Yes.
This is Sharon Lewis. My brother is in that year.
In which year? 86?
The other one, Prentice.
Yeah, and 86?
Yeah, yes. Isn't that him there?
I don't think so.
You don't have to
Prentice
get
was,
him?
I'm going to get to Prentice at the end of the presentation. So,
Okay.
but the point I wanted to make is a few years after Ruth started her school, we began to see large numbers of graduates that have a substantial number of African Americans. That's my point that I wanted to make. Okay. We go to 89. You see some African Americans in here. Now let me go back to 2015. Because what happened was in 2006, Unity wanted their school to become accredited. And what they did is they did a couple things. First of all, they made all sorts of changes in order to get the approval of the accreditation agencies. And one of which was to sever the relationship with the Unity Urban Ministerial School, because it was an unorthodox way to do it. There was no admittance standards. There were all sorts of problems. They cut it off in 2006. So what had worked from 1984 until 2006 was no more for the urban school. And Ruth Mosley went to Catherine Thomas and said, can you form an online program? Catherine Thomas did form an online program. And in 2011, there was the first crop of ordinations coming out of the urban school that was online. And by 2017, there were over 70 students in the Unity Urban Ministerial School. Not all full time, but the Urban Ministerial School was putting out 15 to 20 ordinations every year. This is what was left of Unity Institute, the original program that had been going on since 1968. And of this group of people here, 7 are students. The rest of them are faculty. They were down to 7 students. Here's the 1977 group. Here is the 1974 group. Here's the 1975 group. These are larger numbers. Here is the 1969 group. Let me go back to the 2015 group. We got 7 students in the middle. How many of them are African American? None. Okay. And the point is, the online program disrupted, using a good business term, just like Amazon disrupted Barnes and Noble, the Unity Urban Ministerial online program disrupted Unity Institute. And in 2017, I think it was, I can't remember, Unity World Headquarters shut down its program and passed it over to Unity Worldwide Ministries. Unity Worldwide Ministries, you'll never guess what they did. They formed an online program. Okay. So what I'm making, the case I'm making here is why we need to have institutional pluralism. Because if it hadn't have been for the urban school, there would have been no existing program. But instead, there were over 70 students in this crop that have been built up in the Unity Urban Ministerial School. And 2 of which are known as Mary Grace Sorensen and Belinda Lightheart.
Hi.
Two of our own were able to go through the ministerial training program and probably would not have been able to do so if they had had to move to Kansas City. And there are other 6 stories that are important to get out of this, but I want to bring up of how Ruth Mosley's experiment in 1984 saved Unity's education program in 2011. And we don't have photos of class photos like this, but what we do have is we have galleries like this. And most of these people that you see here were ordained after 1984. And most of them came out of the Unity Urban Ministerial School. Now, the beginning crop that were graduated in 1984 are known as the Detroit 8. And I want to share with you, my question is, how many of the Detroit 8 pioneered churches? Just take a guess. All of you who are from this entrepreneurial town known as Austin, Texas, where you have stuff. How many of the first eight graduates pioneered a church? 8. 6 pioneered them right out of the block. 2 of them wind up leaving their church and pioneered them within a few years. All 8 of them pioneered churches. And the urban school still has this kind of cultural genetics where people pioneer churches. It's far more entrepreneurial than the Unity Institute or Unity Worldwide, Unity Institute program. Okay, I want to highlight one other person. This was taken in 2009, December 27th, 2009 in Shreveport, Louisiana. My parents were living in, that's where I came before. I was living before Austin. My parents were in, I'm not Southern, but I spent 20 years in Shreveport. I got out of town just in the nick of time. Let me put it that way. But I always went back to Shreveport to visit my parents. And one Christmas, 2 days after Christmas, I went to the Unity Church and I ran into Kelly Glover. And what a delight it was. And that's Kelly's sister next to me. And that's the minister, Joy Walker, in the middle. But the guy I want to introduce to you is Dr. Roy Phillips, who passed on earlier this year. And Dr. Phillips was an academic. He led a university in Florida. And when Johnny Coleman had formed her own denomination and wanted to start a seminary, they decided to start it in South Florida. And Dr. Phillips was instrumental in forming the Johnny Coleman Theological Seminary. And Dr. Phillips wound up retiring, and he came back to his family land in Northwest Louisiana called Cotton Valley, by the way, which is just like 10 miles away from where I worked for 25 years. And come to find out that Roy Phillips, Dr. Phillips, really kept Unity in Shreveport alive. It was phenomenal. You would show up on Sunday. He was the greeter. He was the person who passed out everything. He collected the money. He ran the place. And people don't understand how deep Kelly Glover's father was into to Unity and UFBL. Great story. I regret not interviewing him. I always wanted to interview him, and it's one of those things I just never got to do. Okay, so the question, what I want to talk about is, that's part 5. Part 6, I want to talk about where we are today. Okay, in my opinion. And I want to raise up a guy named Richard Byrd. And Richard Byrd is at the KRST Unity Center in Los Angeles. He got there in 1988. And he's in a tough area of town, a really tough area of town. And everyone was telling him and his new wife, you need to save enough money to get out of the ghetto area of Los Angeles, move into the suburbs, go to Englewood. And he and his wife said, no, we're gonna grow where we're planted. And what he's done is he has taken Charles Fillmore full circle. Do you remember where Unity Wings came from? Anybody? It came from Egyptian mythology. Charles Fillmore was a great student of Egyptian mythology. And what Richard Byrd, now known as Mary Ka Ra, has done is he has adapted metaphysical African religion to Unity. And he is, in my opinion, the most creative minister we have had in Unity's history, because he took Charles Fillmore full circle. He took Unity's teachings full circle. And I went out and interviewed him, and 2017, I believe. And got to know he and his wife, Erica, and it was quite an experience. He's not doing well. But I've got his this is his father, who was an AME minister, by the way. And Richard Byrd, Mary Kyle Ra, referenced his father at the beginning and at the end of the interview. He's an extension of his grandfather. He's a great minister. This is Richard Byrd in the Unity Archives when he was a student. This is his initial career was as a jazz singer. I'll play a little clip.
What are these feelings that say I can fly? Am I strong?
And he left when he left school. He went to Africa for a short period of time, came back, and took the church in Englewood. I'd like to play a clip that talks about his experience and of his children going to Sunday school.
Mary Kara. It's pronounced and spelled capital M-E-R-I, capital. Until my children went to the Sunday school. And after several months, they didn't want to go anymore because of their finding racism at Unity School of Christianity.
So
but after that weekend, with an armful of books,
he talks about where he discovered African spirituality.
And on Sunday, I was teaching it from the pulpit. Sunday afternoon, the board was ready to throw me away. And I didn't care.
If you want to know about what it's like to be an African American minister, I think this is probably the best video. It certainly opened up a lot of things for me. I absolutely love the guy. If you go to his church, that is a picture of the sidewalk, and you see there the Unity wings, and in the middle it says Mott. And for those of you who know, that's a significant term in African spirituality. And what Richard Byrd, Mary Kyle Ra has done is blended African spirituality with Unity metaphysics. And when I attended there, it was a 3-hour service that was drumming. It had all the accoutrements of African spirituality. The message was 100% Fillmorian. It was as good a metaphysics as any that I've ever heard. He's tremendously dedicated to metaphysical teaching. And like I said, if you fly into LAX, it's only a 20-minute cab ride to his church, okay? And just know that when you attend, it's going to be a 3-hour service. And it's a great opportunity. That's his wife, Erica. And you can go out to the KRST website and watch their services each Sunday. They view their church as a school. There's all sorts of classes going on there. He's a tremendous man. But he shares the experience of being an African American in a white church, in a white setting, and what he had to do in order to adapt his congregation to Unity teachings. And he's just a beautiful man. I want to close with Sharon's brother. Sharon Lewis is a licensed Unity teacher at Unity in Royal Oak and Sharon chime in if I'm mistaken, but it's a licensed Unity church in Royal Oak, Michigan. Her brother, Prentice Davis, is a Unity minister now retired in Tampa, in the Tampa Bay area. He's also the current president of the Independent Association of Ministers in Unity, and a good friend. And I interviewed him a couple years back. And I asked him, first of all, what is urban ministry? And he's a product of the Unity Urban Ministerial School. This is what Prentice had to say.
Urban ministry is not, the way I heard somebody say to me today, it's not African American ministry. It's not the ghetto, the black section or the colored section or the brown section of a city. Urban is a city. Urban is a community, and the influences and their rituals and their customs in a community. You can be in this city and each community has its own thing. Urban ministry is being able to go into those different communities, those different areas, and being able to be like them to bring a message. Because you can't, I worked at a program one time in substance abuse that the director wouldn't let us wear ties and shirts. Because you're trying to relate to an individual who's been on drugs for 10 years and you're standing over them in a tie and shirt, they wouldn't hear you. That was the director's thing. And it's the same thing with communities. If I'm saying I'm African American and I can't go in a white community because I'm not white, then why be a minister? Why be open? Why have all this knowledge that I think I have about unity, about God, about Christ, about change, about growth?
And I want to close with, I asked Prentice, how do we move forward with racism in America? This was his reply. And let's see.
We had to start having conversations with everyone. We can't have African Americans have a conversation, and white folks have a conversation, and Jews have a conversation, and Mexicans have a conversation. It's got to be everyone. Racism is nothing but fear. It's nothing but limitation and lack. That there's not enough, so let me get mine. We can't let them have any. It's limitation and lack. We have to address that consciousness. There's enough of everything for everyone. Number one. Number two, we're all alike. How can what? 1/10 of an inch dictate who I am? Because once you peel back this 1/10 of an inch, we are definitely all the same. So our customs might be different. Fillmore had it perfectly, the race consciousness. And to Fillmore, the race consciousness was not black, white, Hispanic. The race consciousness is the human consciousness. There's only one race, the human race. And Fillmore talked about addressing that race. Jesus addressed that race. Because he talked to Samaritans and Greeks and Jews. It didn't make him a difference. But racism is back. And tomorrow I'm going to talk about that.
Okay, Sharon, would you like to comment on your brother? Would you like to comment on your big brother?
My big brother, right. I'll just say that when he applied for Unity Ministerial School, he was denied. He was denied, and it was Ruth Mosley who spoke up for him. And after I started getting involved in becoming an LUT and completed the application process, I asked him how truthful was he on his application. And he said he was very truthful. And I said, well, that's why you were denied, if you told them everything that you had done. But he's a remarkable big brother.
Thank you. He's a remarkable friend. And great contribution to unity. Well, folks, that is my presentation. Again, all these links are in that that thing that you can download. It's a PDF that has all the links, and you can go back to it. Feel free to contact me if you wish. I'm open for a discussion. You can answer questions, but again, my role is collecting stories. I try is to interpret as least amount as possible, simply because we each need to do our own interpretation. I hope the stories are rich enough that they impact the interpretations that we make. This morning I did a post where I raised up a woman who's in Hutto, in your neck of the woods now. It's Valentine's Day, and I just love this woman. She's my Valentine. We can go a long way with appreciation. That's my basic point. When we read these stories, we can begin to appreciate what African Americans have given to unity over the years, and the struggles they've had, but the contributions that they make are really what are so important, and how we respond to that with appreciation blesses those stories. It blesses our fellow congregants. So thank you for the invitation. And if anyone would just like to make a point, or I'm open. We are, oh, you know what? Before we do that, I'd like to pass the baton over to Tammy to, I wouldn't be a minister if I didn't take a collection, you know. So I'd like to pass the baton over to Tammy.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I don't know, during the Q&A, if you want to still share your screen, it might be easier if we don't, just because then everybody might be able to see each other a little bit better. But Mark's class is offered on a love offering basis, and I have put the link in the chat. You can also text UCOH love to 77977 and put Black History in the offering notes, and that way we'll know it's for this class. So thank you so much, Mark. I found your presentation very informative. I know Karen Shepard had her hand raised, so maybe she's got the first question for you.
Okay, you were talking about the Book of Ruth?
Yes.
It was written by Byrd Allison, who was one of the instructors in the urban school. And I believe it was self-published. So maybe that's why you're unable to find it, because Bertell Allison is now she's not with us anymore.
Well, I'm going to make a statement that is probably a bit inflammatory. Her publisher has taken it over. It's no longer on Bertell's Lulu website. It's on his website.
Okay. And why is that? Do you know? Or?
That is the big question. I would be cautious. I think you're much better off finding someone who has a copy and photocopying it. Run it through a scanner. Susan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say.
Okay, because I got.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Karen. Karen, you were going to say something.
I just said I do have the book. I got it when it first came out because Bertell Allison Talaferio was one of my instructors, and I admired her very much. And she passed a couple years ago. I believe she was in her 90s when she passed.
I believe it was this past year. Yeah. I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Susan, and then Susan, and then Mary Grace.
I just wanted to say we did have a personal relationship with Sally Taylor, and as a result, she visited our home many times, and so we got some of the side stories from her. And one that I found that I enjoyed so much was that she talked about one of the ways Johnny Coleman assisted what they call the sisterhood in growing their churches. What was that they got together. Johnny called them together at different times, and I don't know whether it was once a year for a while or how often, but it happened frequently for a period of time. And in those sessions, she talked to them, Sally said, about dress and when you could snap your fingers and when you couldn't, and the things you could say. And I mean, they just had this wonderful sisterhood of talking about what was necessary for them to grow their churches. And some of the stories she told around those gatherings were quite funny and hysterical. But Johnny did have a way with words, music, and leadership and everything that was really important, as you said, to the movement. And I was going to ask you, Mark, wasn't Sally one of the first Black instructors there at Unity? I think not, not the first, to be, but I thought she was one of the first Black instructors.
I think you're correct.
At the school.
Yep, absolutely. It was the 1980s when the school began hiring African Americans as instructors. Right. She was one of them. She was a born teacher, and specifically a Bible teacher. And let me just say, I need to get you and Gloria Holt in the same room. The two of you know more about Sally Taylor than anyone else, and so.
Anyway, I just thought the girls' meetings were fun for sure, and I would love to have been there.
Okay, who's next?
And this is Mary Grace. I just wanted to share that about the cottage that's going to be for Johnny Coleman. There are only two. All the little gardens and parks are named after the Fillmores on Unity Village property. And there are no other rooms or monuments to other Unity ministers like we have down at UCOH, down in the Oaks, all the rooms are named after people. At Unity Village, there's nothing like that, but they are designating two buildings. The Ruth Mosley is going to be the former clubhouse is going to be designated, and they're going to have history up in the clubhouse for Ruth Mosley. And they are also doing for Johnny Coleman, they're going to create another building to represent a building J, since it has to be torn down. But I thought that was interesting, and you might not.
Yeah, and I believe they're raising money for both projects. So if anyone wants to contribute, there's an opportunity there. I see Sharon. Yeah.
So I had the privilege of visiting Johnny Coleman's church in Chicago. And it was a campus with many buildings. The church facility was huge, but she also had a restaurant, a separate building that was a restaurant on the campus. When you went into the restrooms, the toilet seats had dollar bills in them. She had them made and they had dollar bills in them. She was very, very strong, as you all know, with the prosperity consciousness, and it just spilled over in everything that she did.
Let me just add, there's one person that I found in the gallery, and she was a very early African-American minister in a completely white Midwest town. She drove around in a green Beetle, Volkswagen Beetle, to promote prosperity. And I think it was a great story. Someone else. Well,
Mark, I'd just like to thank you for sharing this rich history with us. And it seems like every day is an opportunity to learn more. And learning more helps us to stretch our wings and to be better and share these stories. So thank you so much for the research. Thank you so much for the message.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you too. I'm muted.
Who's speaking? I can't.
Barbara, I just
okay.
Thank you so much. I wrote down areas of the website so that people can go and listen, and I'll listen to them all. The more we know, the more that we can connect and gather us all together for that communication that is so called for right now.
Yeah.
So that we can love one another and be the change in this world. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I don't really, were there any things that I could have done differently or clearer, spent more time on? This is the first time I've done this presentation. So
this topic just sounds like it's a full college course is what it is. And you could have spent hours and hours on each one. But I thank you for the overview of it.
Well, it's a book to be written. I once went to Neil Valley. I don't know if you know who Neil Valley is. He wrote the most scholarly book on unity today. And he passed on last year or 2 years ago. And I said to Neil, whoever writes this book is going to get on Oprah. And he didn't take the bait, But it's
how about you, Mark?
I'm the wrong person to write the book. I'm the collector of the stories. It's kind of like the accountant who collects the facts and the economist who writes I much prefer to collect the stories. But there is a great story here. And is the story of, if you read the opening thing, anybody heard of Reverend Ike?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, for sure.
There's these great prosperity teachers who came out of the African American tradition. And the Pentecostals have picked them off from us. They poached us. Okay. But the prosperity gospel started with unity and new thought. And that is the story. African Americans didn't have other avenues for prosperity. They didn't have other avenues for health and medical care. They had to adopt new thought teachings in order to find health, wholeness, and prosperity. And they were successful at it in ways that more privileged people were not. And that is the story. That is the great story. It needs to be told. It needs to be raised up. And we need to understand how African American participation in the unity movement has helped us stay the course. Let me just make one other point, which is an interpretation. There's a fundamental difference between the typical mainstream American white experience in churches and African American experience in churches. For whites, they want to get out. They want to leave because they're shamed, because they're taught that they're sinful, and they come into unity saying, "I'm a recovering Catholic. I'm a recovering Baptist." We've all heard that. Okay, African American experience with the church is that was their protective organization. It was the one place where African Americans had safety. And so African Americans in general are far more committed to church organization and church relationships than whites are. That's just the sociological legacy. And my point is, when I visit an African American church, I see an appreciation for churches there, a commitment to church, a commitment to community that is absent in a whole lot of white churches. I just want to bring that up for consciousness.
Mark, you just made a very important point, and I think it's reflected last week when a number of the large mega Black churches of the South that were connected to the Southern Baptist movement approached that large organization and asked for, let's open dialogue about race in America. Let's open dialogue about our involvement in keeping America strong, etc. And they were rejected last week by the Southern Baptist Conference. And these were churches, some of them with 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 members. So it shows, my point of bringing that up is the willingness of Black Baptists to start a new dialogue and reach out. And the new trend in evangelical Christians to restrict and hold their movement as white Christianity. And it doesn't bid well for the future of Christianity in this country.
Well, at least evangelical Christianity.
Yes.
My point is we need to understand that there are historical reasons why people would have different feelings about church membership.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, the study of the Bible. But the Black experience has been to use prosperity teachings and healing teachings because there was nothing else there. I mean, that was, and so it's like a person who's, you get practicing very good when you got nothing else to do and nothing else to go, no other place to go. And that's that story needs to be written in a careful, scholarly, considerate way. And I hope to accumulate enough stories to get somebody going on that.
I have a feeling that the right author will appear, but it just came to me that wouldn't it be great if that were done with someone representing the Black history of the movement and white, getting the both perspectives, how that affected everybody and how it's still affecting everybody. Mm-hmm. But we have a lot of people in our community that are, worldwide, anybody, but just that someone from the Black community needs to be the lead writer on expressing the Black history. We've had too many white people writing about Black history over the years. And as we all know, the interpretation hasn't been the greatest.
Yeah, Art, is there Art or Arthur?
Art.
Okay, Art. Take a look at Fuller Seminary, fuller.edu. And the reason I bring it up is that they are the premier evangelical theological school in this country. Mm-hmm. They are, they're trying. Let me just say, they are trying. And the seminars they're putting in, and they have, they understand what you're saying,
mm-hmm.
and they're trying. I give them that. And they're, like I said, they're the premier evangelical seminary in the United States, hands down. There's no doubt about that. They're very progressive, but it's worth a look.
Well, I think all of this is just a beginning. I think that little dialogue between the Southern Baptist Convention and others is just a step along the way to a greater understanding of our mutuality and spirituality that, in the next 10, 15 years will be quite different from maybe what the dialogue we're having now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So who's going to call Gloria Holt?
I need a number.
I think I have a number, but
okay.
I've got Susan, I've got your email address. Right. I'll send it to Tammy.
Okay, thank you. I'd love to do that.
And she's a lovely woman.
Yes, indeed.
And let me also say that I think denominations and churches in particular, and denominations in general, are culturally bound. And what I mean by that is they attract people from the same cultural value system. And so you have conservative denominations and liberal denominations and so forth. Unity is one of the few denominations that I think has the capacity to embrace a more diverse value cultural system. And what I mean by that is traditionals, moderns, and postmoderns.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about it. There's some people who are very traditional in their beliefs. In other words, they see God as revealing. They're not so much into love as they are into truth. Let me just kind of say it that way. They're into, a much firmer form of Fillmorian teaching. And then we have people who are more universalist. Unity has the capacity to embrace that in a way that other denominations don't. And it's a great opportunity for unity. So it's not just a racial thing, but it's even broader than that. It's a cultural thing. And I believe we do have the capacity to embrace cultural differences in a way that mainline denominations and evangelical denominations do not. And that's the way I would like to see us go.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank
you. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Take care. All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
So when I click leave, is that going to knock everybody out?
No, you're good because I'm on as the host. So,
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.